This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of How to Succeed in Business by Heart of Spells, composed by Burning Aurora and Flowerhawk. Sirius stumbles into his flat at 1:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. Or is it Wednesday? Whichever day it is, he is stumbling, he is bladdered, and he is laughing as he rams his shoulder into the wall. James's hands are braced around one of his upper arms, trying and failing to guide him as Sirius attempts to swat him away.
I'm fine, mate. Release me.
Orders Sirius, though he'll later admit it sounds more like a garbled mouth holding a lolly between its teeth than any true command. If he remembers, he probably won't. James eyes him warily, though there's a fair amount of amusement shining behind his somewhat lopsided spectacles.
Yeah, completely fine. That's why your shoulder is currently blossoming with that spectacular bruise you'll feel in the morning, and your hair looks like it's been run through an angry leaf blower.
What?
Squeaks Sirius sharply, hands flying to his hair. He pats it down, assures his swimming mind it's all still there, and then angles a wobbling glare at his best friend as James cackles in the doorway.
Piss off, Potter. That's not funny.
Hilarious to me.
Returns James with an easy lift of his eyebrow.
Wasn't kidding about the bruise, though. That's going to smart tomorrow. Best put some ice on it. Can you find the kitchen?
He looks at Sirius dubiously, but Sirius only waves him off as he teeters, down the hall in the mostly proper direction.
I've got it. Go home to your lass. Give her my love and what have you.
Sirius's voice is now muffled, having found the kitchen with relative ease, his head dipping below the counter and buried within the fridge, though he can't for the life of him remember what he's meant to be looking for. Yogurt. That doesn't seem right. Possibly butter, but that also seems far-fetched at nearly 2 in the morning.
Ice, mate.
Offers James from his position in the doorway of the room.
Typically located in the icebox, hence the name.
Sirius pulls back, bumping his head against the countertop as he goes, grumbling and cursing under his breath. He stands and stares at James, butter in one hand, yogurt in the other, looking a bit dazed and lost.
I don't need these.
He asks, mystified. James fairly balks.
I cannot leave you alone.
He mutters, mostly to himself. Sirius drops his items to the floor without ceremony or regard.
No, absolutely not.
Denies Sirius, swaying his way over to his friend, trampling through the butter. He ignores the choking sound James releases at the sight as his hands latch around his shoulder, and Sirius turns him toward the front door of his flat.
Evans will murder me, or chop my bar locks off. Don't want either, if I'm being honest. Go home. I'm fine, just a little drunk. We've been here before. I'll clean the butter up tomorrow. It'll settle nicely. Don't worry, James. Go.
James protests as Sirius shoves him through the door with little regard. He sputters as Sirius closes it in his face, a wide grin spreading over his own face. Once that's finished, Sirius turns, making the treacherous trip back to his kitchen. When he enters, he glances at the smeared butter and splattered yogurt on his floor, but shrugs, deciding to ignore it. He thinks he might like to sit on the floor of his sitting room and stare at the curious pockmarks in his wall, but his eyes catch sight of his open laptop resting on the table. Interest piqued as he tries to remember what he'd been doing before departing for the pub with James. Sirius ventures over to it, ignoring his wobbling legs as he advances. Plopping down into the chair with a nearly boneless movement, Sirius's grin returns when he sees the secondary application open on the screen. Lily had set him up with it, some public relations firm in the heart of the city that she claims Sirius could run circles around any of their current employees. Sirius doesn't necessarily need the job, but he wants it, the position sounding like something tailor-fitted just for him. He'd had one interview earlier in the day with the man who would become his boss if he's accepted. Remus Lupin, sexy. Something mysterious about him, soft-spoken but with glinting, promising brown eyes like liquid honey. Sirius hums to himself as he thinks about him now, pulling his lower lip between his teeth, remembering the sweat coating his skin under his nice suit as he'd tried to restrain himself from his usual incessant flirting that always came so easily. He doesn't recall if he'd been successful or not, but it hardly matters now. His fingers attach themselves to the keyboard, enough of his brain remaining to tell him it's a clever idea to open a new copy of the application. Question 4. What enticed you about this job posting? Sirius smirks at his screen, fingers hacking away as he squints, making sure his spelling is accurate through his alcohol-drowned head.
Finding out what secrets you're hiding under that fantastic suit of yours.
Question 7. What are you looking for in a new role?
Preferably someone who knows how to bend me over the right way.
Question 11. What are your greatest achievements?
I once made a bloke shoot off with his trousers still on just by sucking his nipples. I'd like to try that again.
Question 13. What is your desired position?
Bent over your desk, arms pinned, being pounded like a fucking drum.
Sirius continues his fun well into the morning, chuckling to himself, picturing it all, body vibrating at a low level under the imagery. Once he reaches the last question, his eyes are blurring far too much to focus, but he looks over his work, satisfied with a job well done. Before he pushes himself away from the table, his head a little clearer now, he supposes he should probably submit the correct form. Sirius attaches it to the appropriate email and then shuffles from the kitchen to his bedroom, thinking he's earned himself a nice wank before sleep takes him. He doesn't wake the next day until early afternoon, his mouth feeling far too dry and fuzzy for his liking, his head pounding faintly. Sirius groans as he shifts up from his bed, the sheets a tangled mess around his legs. He kicks his way free of their trap and pads with heavy feet to his small bathroom, splashing cold water on his face, scrubbing his teeth furiously to rid himself of the horrid taste coating his tongue, then clambers into his shower, letting the hot water work its magic. By the time he's finished, he feels more like himself, shuffling off to the kitchen for something to fill his stomach with. Sirius frowns, and then forms a pout no one can see when he spies the yogurt and smeared goop of butter coating half his floor. Huffing to himself, he cleans it up with a wet flannel and then makes himself some toast, smearing the pieces with liberal usage of jam, his anger at the butter not yet settled. He's got a half slice halfway to his mouth when a knock at his door registers to his ears. Sirius drops his toast, casting it a mournful glance before departing the kitchen in favor of his front door. When he yanks it open, he blinks, eyes shifting around, confusion tackling his brain until it calls uncle in surrender. The man on the other side stares back at him, looking mildly annoyed, but his brown eyes glinting mischievously, something Sirius misses completely.
Says
Sirius eloquently.
Hello?
The word emerges slowly, bafflement filling him like a steady flood inside a shallow well.
Fancy seeing you here. Why are you here? How are you here? At my flat, my home, which you shouldn't know about.
He's babbling, he's aware. Sirius does that, he's also aware of this, it's a non-issue. Remus Lupin studies him for a silent moment before he lifts a folded piece of paper held between his pointer and middle fingers.
You left your address on the application you sent me this morning.
He supplies. Sirius searches his hazy mind, struggling to recall doing that yesterday before leaving with James. He can't.
You said, and I quote, "I'll be home all day, come and find me." And then there was a winking face, which was a little too cutesy for my tastes, I have to admit.
Sirius is still struggling. He doesn't remember any of that. He'd filled out that form as straightforward as he could. When had he added that bit? And then suddenly, something kicks at him rather rudely. Foggy memories resurface, dread and a small sense that he should feel incredibly embarrassed cresting within him like a rising tidal wave.
Was this a joke?
Demands Remus irately, flailing the paper around a bit.
Some form of arbitrary prank. I take Lily's recommendations seriously, most times, but I don't like wasting my time.
Sirius's eyes are widening as they follow the paper through the air while Remus continues to gesture. The images of his typing fingers surge through his mind, his stomach twisting unpleasantly. His brain screams, sounding like a small little girl. Question 5. What motivates you to do your best work?
Smacking my arse always does the trick well enough. You should test that. Oh, fuck,
Mutters Sirius. Remus's face morphs in front of him, shifting to something resembling a moderate amount of rage, though there's a hint of curiosity around the edges. He lowers his hand and begins to turn away.
I wondered yesterday at first, but after we got into the interview, I decided you weren't actually a prick. Nice to see I was wrong.
No,
Cries Sirius, hands waving wildly, startling the other man and causing him to pause.
no.
Sirius reaches out, grabbing the arm positioned at the edge of his doorway, and tugs Remus inside without a second thought. The other man yelps in surprise, flailing a bit until Sirius releases him as he closes the door.
No, I was. I was legless. Went out with a mate and drank too much. Came back and now I don't remember much. But I think I filled out that form as a joke for myself. I sent off the right one before I went to bed. Well, I thought it was the right one. I might have made a mistake.
Remus stares at him, bewildered. He holds the paper up in front of Sirius's face after a while, Sirius trying to grab for it, even as Remus pulls it from his reach again and unfolds it, brown eyes shifting over the printed typeface.
For your qualifications, you listed good at taking orders.
He says, ticking off fingers as he reads.
Fantastic arse, mind-melting blowjobs, brilliant tongue in parentheses, excessive enthusiasm, and long fingers.
Remus's eyes briefly drop to Sirius's hands, like he's checking whether that last one is fact or not.
I'm also a quick study.
Offers up Sirius weakly, angling for a jest that falls far too short of the mark. Remus's surly face doesn't change.
I'm sorry, it was a mistake. Please don't hold it against me. Lily will actually murder me if she finds out. You can bank on that. You'll be attending a funeral in the near future if you tell her.
Why would I go to your funeral?
Questions Remus waspishly. Sirius winces, but the other man seems to calm marginally, his eyes flickering over Sirius as he stands in front of him, taking him in, something Sirius can't identify flashing over his expression before it's gone again.
Do you have the real application?
Yes.
Sirius nearly bursts, startling Remus again, sending him back a step. Sirius reins himself in a bit and says in a more controlled tone.
Yes. It's saved on my laptop. Can I give it to you? Then we just forget this whole thing ever happened.
Remus considers him for a lengthy expanse of time until he finally nods, looking a little resigned but also increasingly curious, his eyes narrowing slightly. Sirius slumps in relief, motioning down the hall toward the kitchen, walking in its direction, hearing the footsteps of the other man following him. Sirius immediately heads for the table, opening his laptop and pulling up the saved form.
I've got it open if you want to take a look.
He offers.
I can either print it or send it through email again. Or both. Got a preference.
He glances up when he doesn't receive a response, body jolting when he spies Remus directly beside him, pushing forward, urging Sirius backwards, crowding him against the nearby wall. Sirius gasps in a sudden breath when a hot mouth connects with the skin directly under his jaw, teeth scraping, wet tongue licking a small path over bone.
Fuck!
Barks Sirius, hands gripping around the other man's sides.
Bloody hell, am I meant to react like a rational person here?
Remus chuckles against his flesh, the sound vibrating through Sirius's throat and traveling straight to his cock, causing it to kick with great interest. Fingers wrap around Sirius's wrists, pulling them up and pressing them against the wall on either side of Sirius's head as a thigh wedges between his own.
I'd prefer it if you didn't.
Rumbles Remus, lips trailing up along the line of Sirius's jaw before connecting with the corner of his mouth.
And you did suggest you like being pinned.
Sirius releases a weak, breathy laugh as he grinds his hips forward against the pressing leg.
Did I?
He manages as the leg pushes in harder against him, earning a ragged moan for its efforts.
You did,
Murmurs Remus, his lips grazing Sirius's with feather-light intent, before drifting over to the sensitive patch of skin just beneath his ear. Sirius hisses out a breath as purposeful teeth nip into flesh before it's being sucked in roughly, creating and leaving a bruise behind.
Also said you were good at taking orders and giving blowjobs. Think I'd like to test both of those myself.
Sirius's eyes snap up to Remus's face as the other man pulls back just enough to stare at him in silent question, smirk forming on his spreading, reddened lips.
Oh fuck, yes.
He agrees instantly, eagerly, Remus grinning as the words spill over his tongue.
Whatever the hell you want.
His arms are released from the wall, Remus's hands settling over his shoulders and pushing Sirius down.
On your knees, then.
He instructs. Sirius falls willingly. Fingers work effectively over the fastening of a belt, slipping the leather free of the metal clasp, Sirius watching adamantly, not wanting to miss a single second of the movements in front of his face. As trousers and pants are pushed down over pale, freckled thighs, Remus's cock springing free, bouncing a little with the shift, hard and gloriously presented for Sirius's taking, his eyes chance a glance up at the other man's face.
Well,
Says Remus, sounding authoritative, almost impatient.
Planning to show me proof of those qualifications you boasted so easily about on your application, or not?
Sirius smirks at him, licking his lips as his gaze drifts back down, settling on the leaking head. His mouth waters from the sight, watching as it drips needfully. Remus's hips press forward just a little, showing his impatience, and Sirius offers up a low chuckle before leaning in, tongue flicking over the slit. The man above him sucks in a sharp breath, barely audible, but there all the same. Spurred on by the sound, Sirius grins, his lips wrapping around the head, tongue still moving, circling adeptly, pulling another hiss of sound from Remus. His fingers take the base of the shaft in hand, holding it still, applying a small amount of pressure as his mouth slowly slips further down, taking him in. Remus moans, causing Sirius's eyes to lift briefly before he looks back down. He moves until the tip hits the back of his throat as he removes his hand. He relaxes himself, opening the passage, taking Remus deeper until his nose is buried in the thick curls of wiry hair over his skin. Sirius swallows around him, feeling a shudder race through the other man's body, fingers tangling in his hair.
Fuck me.
Groans Remus from above him. Sirius pulls back at the words, letting Remus fall from his mouth as he smirks up at him.
That'll be me, actually.
He comments, but the fingers in his hair tighten, pulling his head back a little sharply so that their eyes remain locked.
Who said that's how this is going to go?
Questions Remus gruffly, but there's a glint of promise in his honey eyes. Sirius's smirk widens and Remus huffs.
You've still got a job to do first.
He says, more impatience filling his voice as he glances down at himself before looking back at Sirius.
Got to prove you're worth it, don't you?
Sirius's eyes narrow as he chuckles again, his head diving back in, tongue running over the underside of the shaft, tracing prominent veins as he sucks Remus down. The fingers at the back of his head give an insistent tug, not pulling Sirius off but gaining his attention. His gaze flickers up to the lust-blown eyes staring down at him.
Don't look away from me,
Orders Remus. Sirius moans in response, taking the command as given, barely daring to blink, hollowing his cheeks in retaliation as his head bobs freely. He watches as the man's eyelids flutter, Sirius picking up his pace, tongue swirling expertly, coaxing him closer to an end. Remus eventually stills his movements, his grip around the strands of Sirius's hair tightening, becoming mildly controlling. He stares at Sirius in silent question, and Sirius lifts his eyebrows in answer, relaxing his throat automatically, but Remus doesn't immediately move. His free hand lifts to Sirius's face, the pad of his thumb trailing the edges of Sirius's mouth, lips stretched wide and pink.
Christ, your perfection.
He murmurs, sounding almost worshipful.
Thought about this all day yesterday after meeting with you.
Sirius hums around him encouragingly, his brows raising higher at the admission. He wants to speak, say a great many things, but he remains where he is, not willing to release Remus from his hold, waiting for him to respond to his previous inquiry. A sound emerges from the back of the other man's throat at the vibration, his fingers latching more firmly, and then he begins to move, his hips thrusting forward slowly at first and then building speed, setting a pace, cock diving back into Sirius's own willing throat. Sirius moans around him, allowing his tongue to keep working wherever it can, Remus slowly coming undone above him, his hand holding Sirius's head in place, trembling a little in the wake of his building pleasure. He stops suddenly, his breathing rough, labored, and Sirius pulls off him, sucking as he goes, a sharp pop sounding when he relinquishes.
Scared you can't get it up again.
Quips Sirius with a teasing grin, remaining on the floor, still staring up, not breaking eye contact. Remus bends low, his fingers jerking Sirius's head back, arching his neck forward, exposing it, laying its length bare. It's nearly a submissive thing, though Sirius fights back a little, can't help himself, his shoulders twitching, head twisting a little.
If you want a belly full of me, I'll give you that,
Murmurs Remus almost sweetly, only a slight edge to his voice, one finger of his free hand trailing up the side of Sirius's face.
but I figured you'd like it in your arse more.
Sirius groans, his eyes falling closed for the first time. When he reopens them, Remus is smirking down at him, irises overtaken by the black of his pupils blown wide.
Stand up.
He commands, releasing his hold on Sirius's hair so he can do as he's told. Sirius pushes himself to his feet, still meeting the other man's eyes even as Remus steps back and studies him appreciatively.
Strip.
Sirius doesn't hesitate, reaching over his head and gripping into the fabric covering his back. He pulls his shirt off with one quick yank, depositing it on the floor as his hair flies about his face chaotically. He watches as Remus removes his suit jacket, carefully draping it over one of the kitchen chairs before he begins unbuttoning his shirt, eyes sweeping Sirius's exposed torso rapturously, hunger in his gaze. Sirius hooks his thumbs over the waistband of his loose-fitting joggers, tugging them down and kicking out of them easily as Remus's shirt disappears from his body.
No pants.
Observes Remus, arching an eyebrow at him. Sirius shrugs carelessly.
Haven't been up long, and I sleep without clothes.
He provides with an air of casualness. Remus snorts.
Course you do.
He mutters as he kicks out of his own trousers and pants. Sirius grins at him, but it falters as he takes him in, pale skin spread before him, defined shoulders sprawling, impossibly long legs stretching up to bony hips. His breathing hitches when his eyes settle back on Remus's, the man reaching down to stroke himself lazily as he advances closer.
Got lube and a condom?
He asks, hand drifting unrestrained down Sirius's chest. Sirius reluctantly moves away, venturing to his bedroom to grab the items before returning quickly, finding Remus leaning his hips back against the edge of the table. He hands them over and then stands in front of the other man, watching as he continues to move his hands slowly over himself, brown eyes dropping down the length of Sirius's body before lifting back up.
It's not a desk.
Begins Remus suggestively, glancing down at the wood surface behind him before back to Sirius.
But do you think it'll do?
Sirius fairly whimpers, more of what he'd written the night before returning to him with every passing second.
I think it will.
He replies, trying desperately not to sound too eager, but Remus smirks at him, so Sirius guesses that he's failed.
Bend over.
The other man says in command as he moves away from the table. Sirius hastens to follow instructions, leaning his upper half over the wood, elbows resting on its surface. Remus's hands are suddenly cupping the cheeks of his arse, drifting down, nudging his thighs apart before moving back up. Fingers knead into soft flesh, thumbs ghosting along the cleft, spreading him open, exposing him from Remus's inspection.
Isn't that a sight?
He remarks, and Sirius squirms as one thumb dances around the puckering ring of muscle. The hands suddenly disappear, and Sirius can't restrain back the whine that leaves him, garnering a deep chuckle from behind him. They return soon after, wet and slick now, grazing again, skirting the edges until two push in slowly.
Fuck, look at you. You're sucking me in. Are you that desperate for it?
Sirius keens a little as the digits press deeper, his hips bucking back, seeking more. Fingers of a free hand drag down the length of his spine, his back twitching under the sensation, goose flesh sprouting in their wake. He shivers as the fingers inside him bottom out and then spread, stretching him open. Then they're pulling back just as slowly, Sirius's head falling forward, connecting with the wood. Remus allows them to almost leave Sirius's body before he begins thrusting them in and out at a faster pace, eventually crooking them downwards, searching, stabbing, until he finds that bundle of nerves that erupts white spots over Sirius's vision, pulling a stuttering cry from between his gaping lips. A third finger slots in soon, the digits spreading again, working him open diligently even as they continue their onslaught, Remus's bottom knuckles almost bruising against his flesh. The war raging against his prostate is relentless, pulling shudders from Sirius's body until he's a gibbering, pleading mess of himself, hips still pushing backwards for more.
Shit, please.
He finally begs.
Just fuck me already.
The fingers disappear quickly, causing Sirius to yelp a little in surprise at their sudden and unexpected loss, leaving him clenching around nothing. His throbbing cock rubs against the table, straining for release, still completely untouched and yearning. Then the fingers are returning, spreading his cheeks wide, air hitting the slick wetness smeared over him. There's a pressure lining up against him, sitting and resting in place, a promising thing that jerks another moan from Sirius in anticipation.
This what you want?
Comes Remus's voice from behind him, the man shifting just a little, his cockhead snagging at Sirius's entrance, but not pushing forward, only teasing.
Fuck, yes, please.
He pants out, hot breath misting the dark surface of the table. His hips try to angle themselves backwards, but Remus shifts with him, not allowing Sirius to control anything. Sirius waits, breath held, not daring to move now, until the pressure increases as he stretches around Remus's cock. He presses in slow, so achingly slowly, the small amount of friction nearly sending Sirius to madness. He groans, hands dropping, palms smacking against the table, blunt nails scrabbling at the smooth veneered wood beneath him. Hands grip around Sirius's hips as Remus bottoms out and sits perfectly still, ignoring Sirius's keening sounds, his twitching body.
You're just the perfect cock sleeve.
Praises Remus admiringly, his voice low, husky, delicious. Sirius moans as he pulls back with an almost gentle slide.
It's like you were made for this in me.
He thrusts back in, setting an agonizing rhythm that Sirius balks at. His back spasms with every slide in and out until he can't stand it any longer.
Christ, I'm not delicate. Fuck me already.
Demands Sirius bitingly as he finally manages to gain some purchase on the table and pushes back into it a little. Remus suddenly stills behind him, silence falling around them. Sirius tries to glance over his shoulder, but he can't see anything. Then his wrists are grabbed again in a firm hold, arms pulled around behind his back. Remus crosses them over one another and grasps them with one certain hand, keeping them in place, Sirius grunting a little from the roughness.
You did say you wanted your arms pinned.
He whispers over him, leaning low, mouth slipping over Sirius's shoulder blade.
Didn't you? I'm just here to give you exactly what you asked for.
His hips slam forward abruptly, Sirius crying out from the force even as he presses back into it, back bowing from the position and pleasure. Remus keeps going, doesn't stop, his speed and depth increasing, grinding against Sirius's prostate with every inward thrust. The table shudders beneath them until Sirius fears the legs will give out, even as his own threaten to do the same. Remus breathes loudly behind him, one hand still gripping his hip, fingers leaving faint bruises behind while his other hand leaves marks on his wrists. His skin stings with every slap of flesh, small noises escaping from between his gritted teeth. Remus finally releases his hold on his hip, reaching around his front, fingers wrapping over his sensitive cock. His thumb swirls the head teasingly, grazing over the leaking slit before he strokes downwards, back up, down again, then matches the pace of his pounding hips with every slide. Sirius feels the heat in the pit of his belly building, coiling tightly, setting him aflame from the inside out. His release hits him like a too powerful gust of wind, overtaking him, knocking him down flat. He shouts out as he spills over the fingers still working his shaft to oversensitivity, the hips barreling into him relentless in their drive. Sirius grits his teeth through it, clenched down, milking the cock, spearing him open. Remus suddenly grunts behind him, thrusting in sporadically as his orgasm crests before his movements stutter and fall still. He drapes himself over Sirius's back as he pushes in deeply, sitting there, resting, keeping Sirius full of him for as long as possible. When he finally shifts back and pulls out, Sirius groans a little, and finally allows his legs to give out, slumping down to the floor, Remus following behind them, both their bodies sprawling beside one another. Sirius, head spinning a little, stares up at his plain, boringly white ceiling. He should paint it. Something exciting, he thinks. Possibly a mural. Lily's good at those sorts of things. He could ask her. Once his breathing has calmed enough for him to speak, he turns to look at the man beside him, finding his brown eyes fixed on his face. Sirius raises his eyebrows.
I'm not getting the job, am I?
He queries.
Not a chance.
Sirius grins.
Round 2.
Finite. Thanks for listening to this text-to-speech podfic composed by Burning Aurora and Flower Hawk.